Welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dr. Dave Peltz, and joining me is my esteemed colleague, Dr. Joe Hamlett. How are you doing today, Dr. Joe?
I'm doing pretty good, Dr. Dave. Thanks for the introduction. As always, excited to be here.
Absolutely. So another week has come by and come around, so we're here to provide and share our thoughts and wisdom and opinions on just personal and professional development. And we want to thank our viewers and listeners for joining us again, being loyal and sharing all this plethora of knowledge that we just love to spill out every week. So um, with that, let's jump into our topic. And our topic for this week is building relationships. And it's kind of an interesting thing. Joe and I tend to pick topics that are, well, we don't tend to, we always pick topics that are related to personal and professional development, but some of them seem very close or like synonymous with each other. We have talked about networking. So Joe and I like to talk about maybe the different nuances or pieces and parts of different aspects of communication or whatever, personal and professional development. So we're actually going to break away from networking and talk about the building relationship piece of personal and professional development. So, Dr. Joe, what are your thoughts on building relationships?
Well, Dave, that's a very good topic, and thanks for the introduction. When we think about building relationships, Dave hit on one of those areas that is very important, and that's networking. We have discussed networking because, again, if you're looking at networking, building a team or group of people, part of it is building a relationship with them, not just take LinkedIn, for instance. You can go out, reach out to a ton of people, get all these followers and people part of your network, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't really build a relationship with them. So that's very important. That's a very important piece of networking. But in terms of personal and professional development, think about it. The more relationships you build, depending on what it is, the better off you're going to be. So, for instance, you're on a team. You're assigned a team at work in your organization, and you're all tasked with completing this project, right? So, how are you going to learn? Say this is all brand new people, you don't know each other. So, how are you going to learn who has the skills needed to do certain aspects of that project? The way you do that is to learn more about just the person's title, but getting kind of a deeper look into who that person really is. What skills do they have? What education level do they have? What prior experiences do they have? What knowledge do they bring to the table? So that's just one kind of really minor example of how you can use building a relationship in a team environment. So again, think about I'll throw LinkedIn out there again because most people have probably heard this from us before, but the fact that me and Dave actually met on LinkedIn back in 2016, it all started on a different project, but now 7 years later, we do a podcast together. We've got a business together, and we're best friends. And so we took that building relationship a lot further than a lot of people do. And that's not what we're telling you to do, is go out there and find a BFF on LinkedIn or anything like that. But the idea that once we started to talk to each other and learn more about one another, we realized we had a lot of things in common and had a lot of the same ideas about where we're trying to go, what we're trying to do. So again, that's what came of our relationship, building that relationship from the very beginning. And like I said, we both just initially said, hey, would it be part of my network? And this is what has come from that. So
Joe, I like where you're going with this because you started off with the network piece, and that is
right,
reaching out to people that you know or don't know and finding out what you have in common and how you can help each other, networking, just
right,
building that database, if you will, of individuals. The part that's really standing out to me in this topic is the building the relationship piece, because had we not reached out to each other and just said, hey, you want to, connect on LinkedIn? Yeah, that's good. It could have just been left at that.
Yeah.
But we started building, we had these conversations. Maybe it was texting at first or messaging, but then we decided to dig a little bit deeper and find out what we have in common, and then how we can help each other and what we can do to support each other, not financially, but just professionally.
Right.
And it's a give and take. It's not just a, hey, I've got 50,000 or 1.5 million followers. You have to nurture a relationship. It's not a numbers thing. Networking is great. That's a great first step towards building relationships, because you have to have people to build relationships with. I mean, I suppose you could build a
Right. Yep.
relationship with yourself. Okay, that's one piece of it, but we'll get back on what we're talking about. But in order to be able to ask things of others, you have to be able to give of yourself, I believe, to nurture that relationship, whether it's respect, whether it's information, knowledge, experience sharing, just being there, listening, a soundboard, whatever. There are lots of things that go into building a relationship, and I think that's very important to cue in on. Is you can have 1.5 million followers, but do you actually have a vested relationship with each one of those individuals, not because they're following you, but because you're giving back to them, not because they're following you, but an actual relationship, a working relationship, a personal or professional relationship with each one of those individuals. And that can be challenging with those numbers. You can be an influencer, which is great, but to me, it kind of reminds me of when I was growing up. I had all these family members, I don't know, 20 or 30 family members, and I knew about half of them. And of those half, maybe half of them, I actually had relationships with. The other ones,
Right.
the
Yeah.
aunts and uncles and cousins I'd seen once a year at the reunion, when people used to do that. And it's like the rest of the time, I don't know who they are, what they do, where they live, anything like that. So relationship building and building those relationships is about investing yourself and having the other person or individuals invest in you. Collective investing, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it because oftentimes, and I experience this, on the different platforms, people reaching out and saying, "Hey, they'll send me a quick note, hey, I think we should connect," and then next thing you know, they're asking, "Hey, can you connect me with this, or can you help me with this?" So, I like the way you said it, that it's a give and take. It shouldn't be a reaching out to expect something for nothing, and so I think that's, as you said, you can build a 1.5 million followers, but what type of real relationship do you have with them? Yeah, it's a
Mm-hmm.
numbers game. You get the numbers. Maybe that's to your benefit or your gain, but the reality is, what type of relationship are you really building with them? Because it still comes down to that, like you said, just sometimes being a sounding board, sometimes just hearing a different perspective or a different view of something. So I think that's the important piece of building that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to go down the path of a little bit. So within the past year, I sat through a kind of a presentation by a doctor, someone that I became friends with.
Me?
But
Was it
he's
me? Was it?
no, it's a different person.
Oh, different doctor. Okay.
But he threw out in this presentation, he was talking about building relationships and building your team. That was really the theme of this whole thing, was building your team. And he threw something out there that I think is really profound, and I like to recite it when I every chance I get, just because I thought it was very important. So when people are leading a team, and they say they know their employees or their workers or their team members, and he said, "Hey, so if you believe that, I believe you if you can tell me one of your workers who who's sitting next to them and who's sitting in their back seat when they're going somewhere in the weekend." And I thought that was very powerful. That if you say you're building this relationship with your teams, and you say this person who's their spouse or the significant other in the other seat, and how many kids or how many people are in the back seat. It could be their pets, but who's in the back seat. And what he was trying to drive at was, if you don't know the person beyond them, then you really don't know them, because you don't know what motivates that person. You don't know
Right.
what brings them to work every day, what keeps them inspired to keep coming to work. So I thought that was, again, a good way of saying, if you don't know those people on for that particular team member, then you really don't know them.
Yeah, Joe,
So
that's an excellent point because, some folks like to share in the workplace,
right, yeah,
on the professional side. So some people sometimes they overshare. Didn't
right,
need to know
right,
that, but okay.
right,
And then there's those individuals who just want to keep everything completely separate and isolated, which is fine. But
yeah,
building that relationship is understanding that about those
yeah,
individuals, who likes to share, who doesn't like to share, and if they like to share, what do they like to share about? And if they don't like to share, what do they not like to share? Maybe they don't like to talk about their personal life, but they'll talk for hours about the food that they love,
yeah, yeah,
And that's what we're really talking about, is getting to know the individuals for who they are.
right,
Because, Joe and I were talking offline, human capital is the greatest asset of any company. And it's kind of a not very good way to generalize people as personal or professional property. We're individuals. We're all human beings. We so what do human beings, what do they like? They like to socialize, most of them, in one way, form, fashion, or another, whether it's social media, whether it's, going out on the town, whether it's traveling, whatever. They People are social animals. They're human beings that are very social, and we have to understand that in the workplace. And we have to be careful because we don't want to come across, well, I should say, let me rephrase this. We want to be deliberate about building our relationships, but it has to be a genuine effort, not a check the box. So you can say, oh, yeah, I
yeah,
know that person, how many kids they have, where they live. And then later on, when it's convenient for you to help you out, you do something negative towards them to build yourself up and use what they've shared with you against them.
right, yeah,
And
yeah,
we unfortunately, I've observed that throughout my career. I'm not going to say a lot, but on a handful of occasions, and it's not a pleasant thing to see or observe, because with that building the relationship comes a huge amount of trust.
right,
People when they start sharing about their personal lives or their preferences and likes and dislikes and their creative ideas and their thoughts on things, they're they're putting they're putting themselves out there. They have a certain amount of trust, whether it's a professional relationship trust to, hey, I've got an idea that can make the company better or the team better or the product better or the service better, to the personal side on, hey, here's, have you thought about this on raising your kids? Have you tried this? Or what can I do about this with my grandkids or my family members or parents or whatever? So there's a big trust factor there. And once you violate that, it's very, very hard to recover from. So when we talk about building relationships, it is just that. It's not about work. It's not about, loving another person or hating another person. It's about the relationship itself, because you can dislike someone and still have a very good working relationship and a very good personal relationship. And that's good. I mean, you don't have to agree on everything.
right. Dave, you bring up a very good point, in reference to um, people using, personal relationships or building those relationships for their own gain or their own benefit. And then so on the other side of that, sometimes it does leave people kind of at a loss. And it's
Mhm.
that, like you said, once that trust is lost, even if it was not, say, me and you, you violated my trust. And then so next person I wants to get close to me, and they may be genuine, but it may be difficult for me to, forget the previous relationship and those
Sure.
types of things. So that could become a challenge. But
Especially
it,
if you're in a position of leadership or management or
right,
supervision,
absolutely.
or you're a mentor
Absolutely.
or
Where
coach.
it's important for you to
Yeah.
know those things, and again, not to use it for your game, but to genuinely be, concerned about people's well-being. And that does, yeah, introduce a little challenge because of that, that people have been, wronged in the past. And so it's very hard for them to maybe release. So I was just going to go back to the point that you made, that, you know, you may have to come to that resolution that that's the way they are, and not to push it beyond that, or or
Right.
to give them the time to do that. because that it's another piece of it that you're right. You may not know. They may not, someone may not be open enough to tell you about their personal things and other things like that, but they may be open enough to tell you about their passions and other things like that. So, but it still comes down to building that relationship to that point to where they feel comfortable even sharing those things with you.
Right.
May not be at the
And
personal level,
conversely,
but
if you have a good, if trust has been established and you've got a good relationship, you've built this good relationship, amazing things can happen
right.
because they're
Yeah.
more, if someone trusts you and they're building a relationship like you are, and it's, everything's good, and everyone's giving and sharing, and it's reciprocal, then amazing things can really happen. Someone
Right.
will be more open with creativity or their ideas or suggestions or critiquing or taking and receiving positive and negative
Absolutely.
criticism, and just because they're not someone that doesn't talk a lot or communicate a lot doesn't mean that they don't trust you. And conversely, just because you think you trust them or you're in a position of power or leadership or supervision doesn't mean that grants you that respect, that trust, and that relationship. It all has to be built, earned, and nurtured over time. We
Absolutely.
can think about from a personal side of things. I had a friend of mine who I hadn't seen in many years visit several months ago, and we hadn't seen each other in 10 years, and before that it was 20 years. But we picked up right where we left off because we built and nurtured that relationship over time. I'm not saying we spoke every week, but a couple times a year, just checking in on each other, seeing how we're doing, catching up. Sometimes that's all it takes.
Right.
Sometimes
Yeah.
it takes a lot more. So, but it's kind of like that when you've built a good, solid relationship with someone, you can pick up that phone or send that text or message them or email them or however you want to communicate with them. And you're right there for each other. It doesn't mean you're going to give each other your house or your car or your job, but it means that you're there to listen and support and help one another the best way you can.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think of, people have asked me many times, how do you build your team? How do you build trust in your teams, or they have faith in you? And that's what it starts with. It's about getting to know those individuals at the personal level. Again, we all have a job to do if we're leading an organization or within an organization. All have our roles to play, but what's not scripted or put in the description that you have to go build those relationships is the piece that I take to heart, and that again is to get to know people at their level, so that I can help them, where we can help each other. Again, building that mutual trust and respect, to know that I've got their best interests at heart, and again, that goes a long way. A lot of times, people just want to be met where they are, regardless of what your title is or what your role is. People just want to know that they're being treated fairly, and with respect. So I find that funny sometimes when people come to me and say, "Well, how did you build? How did what is your team like you? Or how did you get them to do that?" It's almost like, you poisoned them, or you
Right.
gave them some type of serum that just only now uh, makes them like you. It's
Right.
that work that you have to put into it.
Yeah, it is work,
You have to
effort.
build that relationship, and it
Yeah.
starts with, again, getting to know that individual at to whatever level that they want you to know. And so some like you say, may just be on the surface, which again, that's fine if that's where you both agree that that's going to
Mhm.
work for you, because it still comes down to it's a give and take. And if you go in, fully intentionally trying to build that relationship, and you're getting resistance, then you know the limit. Then you know
Yeah.
that that's as far as it's going to go. And
Or that's
again,
as
you
far
have
as
to
it's
be
going to go
okay with it.
right now.
Right. And yeah, that's the other part of that. You
Because you
don't
can
just, okay,
always
I
put more
tried, I'm
effort.
done.
Yeah.
Right.
You can
Yeah.
always put in more effort. You can always communicate more,
Right.
put a conscious effort into developing and cultivating this relationship. It's kind of like you think about growing things on a farm or in a garden. You can't just throw the seeds out there and go, I wonder why it's not growing. You've got to cultivate it. You've got to take
Right.
care of it. You've got
Right.
to nurture it. And,
Right.
and the same with any relationship. You have to build it. Well, not any, if you want to continue having a positive relationship, you need to nurture it. It needs to be reciprocal. It cannot be all give and no take, because that's not healthy. It can't be all take and no give, because that's just really messed up.
Right.
So, um,
So
yeah,
Dave, one of the things I was thinking about, and this is the other thing that I do, when I in a new environment, I try to observe as much as I can. I've never been one of these people to just come jump right in and then just start, you know, firing things off the top of my head about expectations or anything like that. I really go into it because the other thing that also happens, is, if you become, you get in a position of authority, or you become a leader of some type of group, is people are going to try and pass on their knowledge and experience of that person, and what they think you might get out of that person. And I try and take that with a grain of salt. I let them go ahead and tell me their thoughts, but I try not to let that affect the way I intend to go into that relationship. So I've had that so many times. People try and tell me what they got from that person or that individual,
right.
and I hear it, but I use my own observation and those skills to allow me to make my own decisions about that individual. And for me, that's worked out great as well.
Oh,
Again, not
absolutely.
to
That,
have any preconceived ideas of what this individual brings to the table or anything like that. And a lot of people don't do that. They go ahead and accept what people have told them, and
yeah, that
then they're on the
prejudgment.
exactly, and then they're on the bandwagon with everybody else, but when they didn't take the time themselves
Yeah.
to learn about
And
that
and you and I talk
individual.
a lot about this, that specifically when we talk about how we became acquainted, because we didn't know each other, we didn't know our backgrounds, but understanding
Right.
someone's background and what they bring to the table, that's a big piece of getting to know that person, because what they share with you, it's because they're proud of it, and they feel, and
Right.
they
Yep.
they work towards accomplishing what they've become and who they are. And getting to know them, genuinely getting to know them, means a lot to a person, because people like to talk about themselves. They like to share about what they've learned and help other people generally. So when we talk to people, I love, just like you said, I love to observe, I love to listen, and I love to get people talking about themselves.
Right.
um, Especially in icebreakers, it's a great example. Building a relationship, building that trust, having people just getting up and introducing themselves to each other. They're sitting there for an hour. They have not spoken. They barely looked at each other. They're side by
Right.
side and they don't know. But as soon as you have them, hey, introduce yourselves and start talking, the next thing you know, I'm like, hey, during the break, still covering stuff,
Right.
still in
Right.
class.
Right.
So, it's like they want to know more about each other, and that's a good thing. So, that curiosity piece, that genuine curiosity piece about learning what others bring to the table, who they are, why they are the way they are, what what trials and tribulations, what successes have they, all that makes that person them. And the more you learn about them, and the more you understand them, and the more they're willing to share, and the more you're willing to reciprocate, the higher the trust, the higher the respect, and the more the stronger the relationship.
Absolutely. I think that's very important, as you said, being receptive to, again, not passing judgment, but hearing them, and hearing what they're saying, what they're passionate about, and seeing what they're passionate about. I think those are very important things, because, again, a lot of times we have a preconceived idea about people or a group of people, and so we are sometimes hesitant to allow for new information, new perspectives to come in. And so that's when we struggle with being creative and innovative, is because we still are relying on what we already know or what we think we know, versus allowing anyone else new to our organization, or building these relationships with people and understanding things they bring to the table. And again, it may not align totally what we're trying to accomplish, but we can see a close enough connection
Mhm.
that it will benefit, and there will be a gain by exploring those types of things. So it does make a big difference. I think you said that earlier, that if we pay attention to all of those things. And then I like the idea that you talked about a little bit, kind of like icebreakers, where you get to learn a little bit more about people. And you'd be amazed that, even the team you work with, say on a day to day basis, and you've worked with them for years, it's not until you ask them to maybe tell us something unique about
Mhm.
themselves, or,
Yeah.
something people don't know about you,
Something
is
fun
when you
or
start to
interesting.
learn.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when you start to really learn. It's sometimes that you have similar, likes and dislikes,
Right.
or that you're, like you say, you're a foodie, or
Right.
some of those types of things that sometimes is not obvious, or even if you have a relationship with that person, it doesn't get, put out there until
Mhm.
you have these types of opportunities. So I always welcome those things, encourage those things. When we do our training and our meetings, we always do a, icebreaker, just to learn a little bit more about one another, and
Mhm.
how, again, we're so much alike in so many ways, as compared to what we always sometimes think, that we're not alike,
Right.
that we are not familiar. So it's, kind of to your point, me and you meeting each other, uh, initially it was for something else, but as we started having conversations and learning, that we're a lot more alike than different.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah,
And
it's
and
just
Joe
those.
found out that I'm actually his adopted brother. So we just found that out. No, I'm just kidding.
We don't have the results
We don't
yet,
have the
so
results yet. We're still pending. Patent pending.
right. But yeah, yeah, that's what it's about. Again, it's getting going beyond the surface, and really getting to know people, what they find important, what motivates them, what inspires them. And so once you start to learn those things, then it's easier to communicate, easier to, get on the same path or same wavelength, or if you're not, you have an understanding of why not. And
Right. And
so,
that's where I was going to go as we
yep,
start closing out is, you've built this relationship. Maybe it's time to end the relationship. Maybe someone moves.
yep,
Maybe someone, you know, is no longer in your life for whatever reason. Whatever reason dictates that, the relationship has run its course. What do you do? How do you end it on a good note or not so good note? What if it doesn't end on a good note? So these are part of those things about understanding and observing and listening in that relationship. Hopefully you'll be able to have that conversation. If it's a professional environment and the relationship is not working out with the team, the person's not performing, whatever, you should be able to have a constructive conversation about that, just like you would
yep,
as if they're doing a good job,
yep,
and same with your personal life. As much as you can talk openly and freely about the good things, you should be able to talk about the challenging things in life too, because that's what a relationship is about. Doesn't,
absolutely.
like we said, it doesn't mean you have to like everything about the other person, doesn't mean you have to love them, you don't have to be BFFs or whatever, but you have to at least get along. And in order to get along, you have to understand what strengths and weaknesses or areas of opportunity everyone has to complement each other. And that's important because, if someone moves on to another company, another position, that might be the end of that relationship. I think about, some of the past uh, jobs I've had, whether it's in the military or civilian sector, and it's like some people I still talk to, some people I'm like, I don't know what happened to them.
Right.
And it's not because we disliked each other, it's just separate ways.
Right. Yep. Well, you bring up a good point. I know we're getting toward the end, but I just want to kind of, piggyback on what you said a little bit, because I actually had this conversation a couple of weeks ago with an individual was asking me, well, how do I provide, feedback to someone if they're in a situation and they come to me and they say these things are happening. And so my comment was that if you have this relationship with this person, I said sometimes you have to play devil's advocate, and
Yeah.
introduce things that they may not want to
Yeah, the
hear.
counter views, because
Absolutely.
and you
And I
should be
said
able to do that without
and
fear of
that's where I
repercussion
was
or
going. If you have that relationship that's strong enough, you shouldn't only be the cheerleader. You should also be in a position where you can challenge things,
absolutely.
that they may, because they may come to you knowing you're their friend, and dump on you, and now you get, kind of defensive like them, or now you want to defend your friend. But the reality is, they may only gave you one side of the
Yeah,
story.
you
So
have to be
just
objective.
absolutely. So I just wanted, you touched
That's a
on that, but I
great,
just thought
great
that was
point.
very important. That yeah, we have to, if we have that relationship and it's a real relationship, you ought to be able to. Me and David do it all the time.
All the
I
time.
tell him, I don't want to hear him sing because it sucks. No,
Yeah, it
no,
does.
I'm just joking. But
It's just another key. It's a very flat and very sharp key.
but yeah, we just have to be able to, have both good and bad conversations, and then walk away saying, "Okay, thanks."
Yeah.
So yeah, I just wanted to make sure we touched on that because I know we did briefly, but I just want to again kind of reinforce that.
Great way to close out the show, Joe. Appreciate you and what you bring to the table every week. And with that, we'd like to thank our viewers and listeners for tuning in to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. If you liked or enjoyed this episode or any of our other episodes, please like it, share it, circulate it around. Tell all your friends and family members and friends of friends of friends of friends. That's what we're here for. We do
Yep,
this to help other people. And as we've mentioned so many times, we do it just for the sheer joy of doing this, to help others not have to take that long, sometimes painful scenic route that
yep.
that we've taken through our lifetime. So with that, thank you again. And until next time, keep on being your not so ordinary you.